Good morning. This is Omar Mohammed again, and we are back with our series on the webinars series of the Program on Extremism to Global Extremism papers, which we have successfully published this year with groundbreaking papers. Today, we are bringing to the table a timely discussion, which is based on one of the papers that I had the pleasure of reviewing and editing that is dedicated to a question that I personally have a great interest in following, which is redefining terrorism and extremism in the age of AI. I think we are in a situation where we need to redefine its definitions, redefine how it functions, and redefine how it's also evolving and also probably not evolving, because sometimes, and we will see how this discussion will take us. Sometimes, when there is too much technology, terrorists decide that they're going to remain in the era where they no longer need to use AI because it's their best way of being not detected. So there's more to that. This is why I am honored and delighted to welcome on this panel the two authors, and also in absence their third co-author, Michael Mises and Nicholas Bilanti, and the third co-author is Dr. Nakisa Jahanbani. Michael and Nicholas will present the paper they co-authored with Nakisa, which was published for the inaugural issue of the Global Extremism papers. Their paper argues that artificial intelligence is poised to redefine terrorism and counterterrorism in the coming decades. I think we are already witnessing that. As an emerging capabilities blur the lines between domestic extremism, insurgent violence, organized crime, and hybrid warfare. It also traces how conflict from Russia-Ukraine war to the Israel-Hamas clashes have accelerated the integration of AI into military operations. There is more. I don't want to reveal everything now. I want them to take the authority of telling us everything here about their paper and their findings and recommendations. This is why I would like to welcome both of you in this webinar, and the floor is yours. I think we go with Michael because he is first on my screen, and then we come forward with Nicholas.
Thank you, Omar. I just want to say thank you to the Program on Extremism for accepting our paper and allowing us to speak with everybody today. Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Mieses. I'm out here from New York. I currently have 10 years in Army and National Guard experience, and I do cyber intelligence in the private sector. I do want to give a shout out, as Omar said, to our co-author, Dr. Nakisa Jahanbani, who was instrumental in getting us together with this. She brought myself and Nick the opportunity to write this paper. Her knowledge in the space was super helpful in getting us together, especially from an analysis perspective. Unfortunately, she was not able to make it here today to co-present with us, but I want to make sure she get the credit she deserves. And with that, Nick, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, want to echo Mike's thanks to the program and all the folks that supported the paper, and our co-author Nakisa. My name's Nick Bilanti. I am a member of CrowdStrike's professional services team, where I work on our platform side, so codifying things like best practices, reusable architectures, kind of the best way to use and deploy our platform to maximize keeping our customer base safe. And then I'm also involved with some of our go-to-market for AI services. So that's me, based out of Nashville. I think I'm going to go ahead and share.
Please do. Just also a reminder to our audience, while you are listening to the presentation, please do put your questions in the Q&A section if you have any questions, and we will be following up after the presentation.
Cool. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and share out, and we'll get started.
All right, I will open it up. So our paper was called Terror 2.0, and what we set out to do was take a lens to what we traditionally defined as terrorism, essentially pre-COVID era, and how that's evolved today with the introduction of AI into the mainstream security landscape, into mainstream media, and it's now, as we can all tell, it's a very important part of our lives that we must pay attention to. Next slide, Nick, please. So we wanted to start off here with an executive summary of just talking about convergence. While AI is an accelerator of threat actor activity, it is not, as a singularity, a new weapon in of itself. What it does is that it fuses cyberkinetic and psychological capabilities and makes it accessible to different levels of threat actor, whether it be nation state, cyber, lone wolf terrorism, and transnational crime organizations. And with that, we see that barriers to entry are collapsing, where it becomes more commoditized. There's jailbreakable models that are and frontier models that allow small actors to replicate capabilities once only thought to be reserved for their highest sophisticated actors in different domains, that's specifically cyber, and we'll talk more about cyber throughout the talk. And the trend line steep is that third point there. When we were going through different case studies and different examples in 2025, when we wrote this paper in the fall of 2025, we noticed that our research window being between the end of the COVID era to 2025, that trend line was very steep. And now we're here in 2026, almost at the halfway point, and we see that trend continuing. Finally, when we talk about prevention and policy pillars, it's important that, forums like this one and in other spaces where you see industry and government collaboration, it'd be really one of the most important things to get ahead of this AI issue, especially in the security landscape we're in. Other than that, let's move forward. Next slide. So in order to really frame what we set out to do was to reassess how AI affected terror, we needed to look at other historical examples of hybridization. So the two primary use cases were Colombia and the FARC, and then Syria and ISIS, where we saw not necessarily technological hybridization, but a fusing of non-traditional means to further their broader strategies. In Colombia and the FARC, their revenue stream was tied, to cocaine and political propaganda that grew their ideological insurgency and essentially turned them into transnational crime, but furthered their agenda within the state country of Colombia. And then with Syria and Iraq, ISIS having a pretty dominant foothold in the region, they use and between antiquities, the tax, the safety tax they put around the populations and the oil, they were able to evolve into drone autonomy, into one of the most sophisticated propaganda machines that we see today. And what this proved is that there's a propensity for threat actors of different types globally, that they have the propensity to adopt different and unique means and fuse them with a more traditional harm vector towards their adversaries. So we took that and we realized that there's this sort of shared innovation space between terror groups, TCOs, and state proxies, where they're highly adaptable. And now with AI, which is not, AI isn't cocaine, AI isn't oil. It's a digital means that is not physically, you can't hold it. Therefore, it's easier to have access to. It's low cost. And they're now leveraging that in the same ways they've leveraged other means to further their organizations. Next slide, Nick, and I think I'm going to pass the mic to you.
Yep. Yeah. So now kind of understanding where we are today and how AI is affecting these different groups. And I think the point here is none of the 5 capability domains that we analyzed or targeted in our research and analysis are new to the terrorist space or the terrorist group, right? It's kind of this, when we think about how is AI affecting these, it's how are they accelerating these capabilities? How are they allowing these groups to move within these capabilities simultaneously? That's kind of the difference or the AI inflection point that we tried to understand with our research. And so I'm just going to go through each of these is like at a high level to explain them and then kind of talk about it a little bit. But like I said, this is things that these groups have been doing before AI started. It's just that AI is now, this is kind of the injection of almost value for these terrorist groups using AI, like Mike had just mentioned. And so the first one, 2, live in the information space. So AI-enabled recruitment and identity deception. Those are, techniques when we think about deepfakes, synthetic propaganda, chatbots for propaganda and radicalization across these groups for their recruitment. So again, similar things of what they've been doing, but the ability to develop and create that content and scale it out at mass has become easier, and the barrier to entry to doing it at scale with AI. Same thing with identity deception, synthetic personas, forged documentation, adversarial evasion of facial or biometric screening. Again, lower barrier to entry with AI. Physical and kinetic weapons, we see that with a lot of things like in the drone space, right? So understanding how commercial drones and weapons can be repurposed for precision strikes with little to no human in the loop, or keeping the human in the loop, but keeping it in a way that human is protected from harm's way. The AI is kind of enhancing the autonomy of using those weapons. The big one, which we will talk a lot about, I think, especially in the Q&A discussion after, because we see it as a very steep, accelerated trend line to where these groups are going to unlock value, but the cyberspace, so using AI to enhance cyber operations, everything from generating malware, spear phishing, really anything that can be automated and enhanced in kind of the information technology area, and the weaponizing of that from groups using AI. And then finally, the last kind of capability area that we looked at, very similar to how AI has been used for a lot of, has been started to be used for a lot of R&D research in the pharma space, kind of taking that and repurposing it for the bad actors' intentions in the chemical and nuclear space. So things with like tactical innovation, where these groups are starting to generate chemical models to kind of lower the barrier to entry for things like bombs or novel toxins, and the acceleration towards that. So these are, like I said, it's not necessarily in our research that we're claiming that these are anything new that AI has brought to these groups. It's the idea that AI is allowing these groups to move and work across these different capabilities at speed and at scale and at a lower barrier to entry than they were before. So it's kind of a repurposing or an acceleration of some of the existing strategies that they had. And then kind of what the actual data showed us when we started analyzing our capabilities are these, we have a couple key directions and trends that we wanted to call out into how we observed these groups that were using, have started to use AI. I do want to have a quick call out for the data that we used as part of this paper and this study. Obviously with OSINT data, there can be a little bit of an underreporting or underexposure bias. And then also the idea of we do have what is publicly available to us is kind of curating that data set. So these numbers and this data should be kind of viewed as showing the trends, and but not necessarily that we do acknowledge some of the limitations possibly with the OSINT open source data. But I think we feel pretty confident, especially with some of the other data that has come out from since we published this paper, that it does show that our directions and trends continue to be supported for us to kind of continue to project these findings. And so if you look across the donut chart on the left there, kind of shows our breakdown and distribution of the documented malicious capabilities that I just talked about on the previous slide. And as we kind of analyzed and sorted through that set, we kind of saw 5 big trends here. I mean, it should be no surprise, especially if you were able to review our paper before joining, that we did see that the volume of the use of this AI has accelerated or rose from 2023 to 2025. We saw almost a near doubling of reported incidents where these groups were using AI, again, kind of signaling the underlying theme of an accelerated shift towards these threat vectors, the idea that if this technology is available and it's helpful, it's going to continue to be used. And as we see additional capabilities unlocked, additional potential for this technology, we're going to expect to see this volume trend to rise. But in the sample set that we reviewed, like I mentioned, we saw that it continued to grow over that 2-year period. 2024 contained a peak of incidents from the sample set that we analyzed. We were able to see that, especially within the synthetic media space, tracking against the 2024 U.S. presidential election cycle, where some of the capabilities and testing for some of those influence operations were very clearly being piloted almost by these groups. So we saw a peak of synthetic media capability use in 2024. 2025 showed a surge as well, this one specifically in capable models that were commoditized and jailbroken. So again, moving more towards how can we use this AI not just for things like generating content, but kind of surging more towards, like I had mentioned, one of that big things that we are interested in hitting on is kind of AI enhanced cyber operations. So jailbreaking those models to actually produce malware, automate exploitation. A trend of that started to surge in 2025. Kind of looking at the data and the items that we were using, we did notice two quick callouts there at the end. The patterns appeared to be borderless, so most of the events that we coded were considered global or unspecified. However, for the areas that we were able to tag, we saw that our top regions were Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and the United States. I don't think that there are any surprises there, especially if anyone's been following what's going on in the world right now. And then finally, just the last one with the battlefield capabilities. So again, if you've been paying attention to some of the things that are going on in the world out there, kind of using and seeing some of these larger, more advanced nation states or different groups that have been using AI or more automated capabilities in their warfare, kind of the trickle down effect of understanding that as autonomous weapons and kind of the different tactical innovations come out and are proven on the battlefield of conflicts such as like the Russia-Ukraine conflict, they can move kind of into the reach or knowledge of capabilities that can be folded into these non-state actors. So these are kind of analyzing the data that we use, some of the detections and trends that we saw for the use across these capabilities. So I think we're going to go back over to Mike now to kind of talk about our case studies.
Thanks, Nick. So in the broader paper, you can see that we focused on four from what we thought important case studies that allowed us to study AI's impact across different domains, right? So starting at the top left, in 2022, there was the Zelensky surrender deepfake. It was crude at the time. It was quickly sort of debunked by Zelensky himself, but it was the first high-profile example of a deepfake being weaponized in a major armed conflict, serving as a proof of concept for strategic deception. And looking forward, as AI advances, it can be assumed that the failure rate of exploits like these may decrease. A convincing fake of a national leader conceding defeat or declaring martial law, that could have catastrophic consequences in the conflict region, right? And that was in 2022. We are now 4 years from that, right? If we look at deepfakes now, they have advanced, but this was sort of a flashpoint as to what it can do on a broader scale. Moving down, there was agentic AI cyber misuse in 2025, where threat actors drove an AI coding agent through full attack kill chains against 17 organizations across industries, and also like setting extortion amounts in that in parallel, right? Like we've seen that North Korean threat actors have used open source, you can download it, we can all download it, Claude models to fake profiles to commit acts of deception and fraud against US Fortune 500 companies and actively getting hired in these Fortune 500 companies to steal things like intellectual property, cryptocurrency, what have you, to support the DPRK's national strategy. Um, Again, in 2025, we had the Philippines 2025 election, which was indicative of a broader influence operation where the election was between Marcos Jr. and Duterte, and that rivalry escalated into this digital smear campaign, where both sides were leveraging disinformation to essentially strong arm the opposing party. And nearly a third of those unique altered claims during that midterm election likely involved deepfake technology to impersonate public figures. And even in the industry space, this is referred to even by companies like OpenAI to prove that AI can be used to generate different sorts of propaganda and misinformation to amplify content, to amplify a message, whether it be right or wrong, factual or false, to and these trends are being truthfully used by regular, run-of-the-mill businesses to draft PR strategies. And if that's not crazy to you, if you have PR firms analyzing how misinformation works in an election to sell a product, that is a pretty solid indicator of where AI has such reach between different domains. And then finally, at the bottom right there, we have the Russo-Ukrainian drone war, which is a kinetic example of how AI has affected the landscape, where you have AI-guided drone strikes in jammed environments and coordinated automate automated coordination, with commoditization putting it within reach of not only lone actors and HVEs, but to other nation states and insurgencies as well. Where what's important about the Russo-Ukrainian drone war, and we'll talk more about it later, is that it starts at a nation state conflict level, almost as a proof of concept. and then others around the world, regardless of sophistication, financial means, or anything of that nature, they see that it works, and then the way that AI is moving, it's constantly getting better. So if a large armed conflict is a proof of concept, one could assume that anyone who would adopt that would either improve it or copy it and would be unable to cause harm in their own way. Next slide. Things back to you, Nick.
Yep. Yeah. So now kind of when we take that data set and our analysis of it, we kind of built our projected threat horizon related to the use of AI within terrorist groups. And these aren't necessarily projections or predictions with dates assigned. I think kind of the idea of how we wanted folks to think about this or kind of understand the impact of adoption on terrorist groups is kind of is almost viewing these as adoption phases. So kind of as groups continue to adopt and implement AI in their operations or in their capabilities, like we discussed previously, these are kind of the different phases or results of continued adoption in kind of what we're calling these year ranges. So right now, we would say in the next 5 to 10 years, we're currently in the normalization phase. This is where groups are looking to adopt, make the models and the capabilities become more novel or integrated into their everyday operations. So things that kind of that, especially it's very similar to what we're seeing with like the commercial or like the private sector adoption of AI as well, right? There's this period of adopting, folding it into your normal operations, making things that today are manually routine, automating them and understanding that kind of folding them in and making it a normal business operation to have these to enhance your operations. And just once you have it normalized, just continuing to, as tools become cheaper and more available, just using that to continue to enhance your routine operations. Once you've kind of normalized it or sanitized it within your organization, you're ready for that next projected stage of adoption, or for in this case the threats, which would be escalation. So once it's become normalized and used regularly throughout the organization, kind of that medium term bucket of in the next 11 to 15 years, we expect these groups to continue to build off of that and to escalate their outcomes associated with AI across those capabilities. So things like being able to build off of what's become routine to execute complex critical infrastructure, cyber attacks, supply chain with advanced AI tooling. Again, the kind of that normalization period sets the foundation, has groups understand how they can start to adopt it. Escalation is really where we start to see them building or gaining, I guess, the value of that previous adoption or normalization period into an escalation. And then finally, the catastrophic plausibility, I think, want to call out the term plausibility, right? We're not saying that in 15 years there's going to be an associated AI crazy cyber Armageddon, but the idea of if some of these trends and adoptions continue without guardrails or intervention by other groups, we do think that it, based off of what we saw in our data set, we do project that it is plausible that, again, you continue to stack and iterate value on adoption of these technologies, that it will get to a point where these groups have invested and understood how this technology works so well to the point that they would be able to execute very complex, large-scale, catastrophic use cases powered by AI. So things like using AI to develop WMD weapons, very heavy use of autonomous vehicle attacks, all of that, again, kind of building on this step-by-step projected threat horizon. Again, I think thinking of this as phases that we project that these groups are going to move through. And I think one of the easier ways to kind of understand and view this is also a lot of what we're seeing in the business world as well, as we see every day different companies are working on adopting and moving through their phases of AI adoption. Same exact thing here, just it's projecting with threats at the end of the day with how these groups are choosing to use their capabilities. So, and then I'll give it to Mike for some updates on kind of where the paper has been since we wrote it.
Thank you, Nick. And I just want to take a second here. I see a question in the chat regarding one of our use cases we studied in the paper. Yes, that was against our own CI, specifically healthcare and emergency services. Those were prominent ones. And the details of all that are available. If I'm not mistaken, we did pull it from an open source report and validate it across an academic report or I believe an industry report that called this out. So it is out there. All right, that's all I'll say. Next. All right. So what has moved since this paper was written? We made the joke before everyone came on here that if we wrote this paper today versus almost a year ago, this paper would look a lot different. So we wanted to talk a little bit about, what has happened since essentially the end of 2025 to now in the 6 months, right? So we've seen new incidents and cases with AI, specifically in the cyberspace, and also like how AI has enabled harm in a kinetic way, right? So we saw the Mexican government was breached by a Claude jailbreak where a bunch of sensitive taxpayer records came out. UAE, thankfully, they were able to stop an AI-enabled cyber attack on their vital infrastructure, and obviously there were more deepfakes on a CEO, which is a high symbolic value target. So if a CEO can get targeted by a deepfake and they say something in that deepfake that could move a market per se, that has high societal impact and if that a nation state attempted that, that would work in their favor. And finally, most recently, OpenAI is being sued over ChatGPT's role in a mass shooting. So what all this is to say, like while it taken in a silo, each of these events, it's just AI running rampant, but you put it all together, it's indicative of a broader capability and support structure that threat actors could use to further their operations. In terms of policy and governance, AI, thematically, AI's regulatory body frameworks and governance frameworks that we have, it's not as bulletproof yet, in my opinion, as it should be to prevent some of these things. And frankly, it's more voluntary rather than a mandate. If we look at the top right, Nick touched a little bit upon it on, this sort of Skynet scary darkness that has been highly sensationalized. And while I do agree that there is some sensationalization around how AI is coming for all of us, but all these new frontier models that are coming out are discovering how vulnerable our infrastructure is from a cyber perspective, meaning that threat actors could take advantage, they could see these attack chains, they could exploit these attack chains to an unparalleled degree of damage. I'm gonna stop on this slide here because I want to be cognizant of time. So if we can move on to the next slide, Nick. So all that's to say what this means for terrorism at large, right? And we essentially whittled it down to these five themes. Is that A, the time for preparation is either extremely narrow, nigh on non-existent. It's here. All these AI innovations, that normalization phase that Nick spoke about, it's here now. And organizations, whether they be private sector, whether it be government or as a private citizen, we need to make sure that we are proactive rather than reactive when it comes to this. Secondly, this democratized capability means that anyone can be a nation state actor if they felt like it. It's a low cost capability that can help low cost means. I think that was seen with the drone attacks, right? Whether it could be argued the efficacy, the accuracy, and the feasibility of something like a autonomous drone strike, but the fact of the matter is that it is possible, and we've seen that it is possible. You can go to Best Buy and buy a drone tomorrow, and you can have Claude Code whip you something up the day after. Another challenge that AI poses is attribution with synthetic personas, cloaked cyber ops, and shared tooling. It makes it a lot harder for counterterrorism efforts to be like, who did this? Because there's a lot of layers that it can be who enacted it, but then who created it in the first place, who supported that. And because it's AI, how it creates the challenge of how do you hold AI accountable? Furthermore, related to attribution is that categorization between terrorism, TCOs, and proxies. It's starting to blur. AI has made that harder because now the capability that used to differentiate those three things are now being shared, straining things like laws, mandates, and jurisdictions, necessitating more governance and regulatory bodies to make sure that we are approaching counterterrorism operations in a new way, but also in a safe and judicial and fair way as well. Finally, all of this is to say that there's a dilemma that defenders must contend with. If it says it here, and I really couldn't put it better myself, is that an AI-equipped attacker needs to be right once, and there have been no faster than before. Nick wrote that piece, and I really couldn't have put it better myself. An AI attacker just has to be right once, and they have a lot of chances to get it wrong over and over again, but they only have to be right once. Next slide. I think we're going to end on you, Nick.
Yeah. So kind of where do we go from here, and kind of lead us into the Q&A for, we don't want to just end on, AI's terrorist groups are adopting AI, they're accelerating, they're generating their capabilities. There are ways and guardrails to limit that. And like Mike was talking about on that last slide, to be proactive instead of being purely reactive. We know these groups are going to use this technology. This technology is transformative. It's got, in terms of the returns and like operational efficiencies that it can give to organizations, whether it's terrorism, business, public, private sector. Everyone, I think, is very keenly aware of where it is, of the outcomes associated with using this technology. So it should come as no surprise that these bad actors or these threat groups are adopting this technology. The way that we go from here is to understand how to limit their ability to maximize value from these models, their ability to maximize the value by adopting this technology. And so this is kind of our 4-pillar framework that we touched on in the paper for our recommendations of where to go now that we have noticed and understood this trend, projected this trend, what can we, and by we mean this entire group and countries and organizations, kind of go from here, and the ways to handle it in a proactive manner. So kind of 4 steps. Again, I know we're going to probably, I think, talk about this a little bit in the Q&A, so I'll try and be conscious of time and go quickly. But the idea of, we want these guiding principles to be deliberately broad, to kind of resist the urge to write like super detailed rules that can also slow down the pace of innovation, especially understanding where that this is developing technology, and we're almost in terms of the AI race, right? It's kind of like almost a Cold War style race towards who can develop these best models as fast as possible. We want to be able to recommend like a regulatory framework that doesn't also slow down the pace of innovation and put the groups that we're trying to protect at a disadvantage. And when it comes time in terms of development. Also, the idea that these technologies are changing so rapidly that it kind of at the speed that you can legislate, you may have something that was a great policy for this set of models and capabilities, but by the time it's enacted and fully rolled out, the capabilities have shifted so dramatically, again, at that pace of innovation and acceleration. So kind of our 4 pillars that we think that successful and AI-related policy, especially in terms of limiting the harmful impacts from these terrorist groups that we're starting to see adopted, would be, first, a dynamic, comprehensive regulation. One of the key pieces of this pillar that we hit on in the paper was AI regulatory sandboxes. So exactly what Anthropic did with their Mythos model, and kind of Project Quiltworks, for folks that are aware, kind of before that becomes publicly available, testing, working through features, red teaming that with public and private partners that are leading in the space. So almost sandboxing and regulating and limiting the harm of that model before it gets generally released. Pillars 2, 3, and 4 are very similar together, so I'll talk about them for time reasons, but just kind of the idea of having strategic partnerships between internal, international, public-private partnership that leads into information sharing, transparency, working together with folks and groups that have a vested interest in keeping this technology to be used for the greater good, and having those groups invest in each other for research, development, and expertise. So really, the core theme, I would say, of our framework or understanding of this is acknowledging that this is fundamentally groundbreaking technology that has the ability to change the world, both good and bad, and then suggesting pillars for partnership to continue to develop this in a safe and secure way, while also allowing for that transformative growth and development. So I will probably park us back here on this slide. So I think it gives us kind of a good segue to go into the Q&A, but Omar, I will pass it back to you as we've kind of finished the conclusion of our paper and are ready to kind of take questions and discussion.
Nicholas and Michael, thank you. Even though I don't see green shoots for the future of AI, but I do hope that in the Q&A we can figure out how do we discuss policy to, as you mentioned, to be proactive rather than waiting for disasters to happen. And I prepared multiple questions, but before I go into them, I want to encourage the attendees to please send your questions, and I will take one of the questions that actually came in the Q&A, because I also want to follow up on that. Both of you mentioned the AI coding agent that launched a full attack, kill chains against different 17 organizations across industries. Like, if you don't mind elaborating on that, if you don't mind providing more context and information and more details into that question, because as you also know, and probably before we start the event, I had asked you the question of what has changed since you published the paper, and of course there will be more questions that I will follow up with. But if you feel you want to answer this question now, I think we should get into it, and then I would start my own questions.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely elaborate on that kill chain event that happened in 2025. So what happened was I believe it was a researcher. So thankfully it was not an act of malice, like, a threat actor based. It was a researcher that discovered, I believe it was a Claude agent, one of the earlier ones, that was able to map 17 different attack chains, unique in itself and unique to the organizations that it was targeting across different infrastructures, specifically in the US. And it was never reported what the success rate of that attack would be, but I think the biggest sort of takeaway from that was that it's definitely possible. And that was it was reported in fall 2025, assuming that probably happened a little earlier in 2025 before we had it reported. And then to follow up on that, Omar, like how has that idea and thinking evolved to today? We saw frontier models, like I think the most prevalent one in recent memory was Mythos, and that saw all the vulnerabilities across probably in the hundreds. Nick, you can correct me if I'm wrong, hundreds of different toolings and things that critical infrastructure, private sector organizations rely on, and that caused quite a flurry in our industry where now these vulnerabilities are being discovered, and the big ethical discussion around that is like we are giving these tools out in the open for threat actors to be able to leverage. We're essentially giving them the answers to the test without making them, for lack of a better term, work for it. So in terms of like the transfusion sort of dynamics of like where things start and go, it's almost as if we're societally with all this AI promoting this sort of behavior with new coolness, and a threat actor would then leverage that.
I think I go back to my questions, but they are also connected to the ongoing question of giving access to coding capabilities, but also putting it in the hands of malicious actors. That's why I would like to go back to how you opened your paper. Is that you opened it with the claim that emerging AI capabilities are forcing a re-evaluation of modern terrorism definitions. As you also mentioned in the paper, that threats increasingly blur the lines between what is known as domestic extremism, insurgent violence, organized crime, and hybrid warfare. My question is, what is it about AI specifically, as distinct from earlier technologies terrorists have adopted? Like, what is it that the terrorists that found in AI that is different from previous technologies that we have seen, which also strains the existing definitions? We have multiple different. We have 92 definitions. In fact, over 92 have been written in books, but other are still floating. And in your also opinion, what would be a fit for purpose definition that need to capture? That what does any definition that you think of need to capture when it comes to this chaos of, if I'm capable of calling it chaos of AI? I'm a very supportive of the evolution of AI technology, but I'm also very worried and concerned about how it is transforming the capabilities of terrorist organizations and allowing them to really even develop the level of their targets, not just developing their capabilities, but their targets are also becoming different and also more easy to get?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So let's break that question down for the first piece of like what has changed, right? Like we like as you mentioned, we did speak at the beginning when we open our papers that this necessitates a reevaluation for how we define terrorism. So fundamentally, and to your point, Omar, there are 92 definitions of terrorism, right? And when we were writing this paper, we were just me, Nicholas, Nikisa, were like, which of the 92 do we start with in terms of traditional terrorism? And I think, into this forum, let's, for the sake of argument, say that terrorism is defined as an act that incites a level of political violence, promotes an ideology, and causes fear among a mass population, right? So where AI comes into play is that AI accelerates that definition. It accelerates how threat actors would spread fear. It accelerates how violence can be perpetuated. We open the paper with examples of how terror groups have acted in the past. We mentioned the FARC and ISIS, and we prove like hybridization isn't new. Terrorists have been adopting new technologies like IEDs, encrypted communications, drones, each at a compressed cost or time or reach to accelerate their operation. But what AI does is AI is the first technology that makes threat actors faster and higher impact at the same time. It's a single use that all accelerates cost, time, and reach in a simplistic way, and is the first technology that terrorists have adopted that does all three of those at once. And it compresses all three simultaneously across information, cyber, connect domains in parallel. Um, Also, when we talk about blurring the lines, right? So attribution is a legal hinge and it sort of breaks now, where existing terrorism statutes assume an identifiable actor with declared intent. However, now with AI, those AI-enabled operations distribute action across automated tools, different personas, different chains, where it creates challenges for counter-terror groups to say, like, here along an attack chain is where it happened, right? Like to point to a specific step in a plan and say, boom, that's when that threat actor did that, right? If we look at the example we've been talking about with you know, a threat actor using AI to automate research and find a kill chain against the target, can you say with confidence that it was that threat actor who did that, or was it the AI who did that and the threat actor read it and used it? And which of those options becomes the option to take more seriously? Is it still fully on the threat actor, or is it on the model that allowed that threat actor to do that? And that's where the attribution pieces become difficult. And to your third question, when it comes to targeting, we did speak a little bit about like how threat actors now, whether they be sitting at home in their garage or they're in a nation state with a capable financial and operational backing behind them to create to target what they need. Now, because of how reliant we are specifically on cyber infrastructure, that's across any critical infrastructure, that's any Fortune 500 company, where we are overly reliant on cyber solutions, cybersecurity, digital solutions. Now, threat actors can have their pick of the litter of their targets, where it opens that attack surface has opened that door for a threat actor to take advantage of. Nick, if you have anything that you want to, I know this is a topic that hits near and dear to you as well.
I think Mike did a pretty good job on hitting basically everything. I just wanted to kind of like laser in and dial in on something that he said, and also the part of the question of kind of like why AI, like why, there have been technological innovations that have come out, but like why specifically is AI such a threat for these groups and organizations and how they use it? And I think what is really important just to key on in terms of framing the malicious use of AI is like terrorist organizations. There's really no inherent difference between how AI transforms a organization, like a business organization, and how it transforms a terrorist organization. Like the same capabilities, like automation, scale, speed, a lower skill barrier, like force multiplication. It's just that both of these organizations are pointed at a different objective, right? So a company may use AI to scale their operations. Terrorist organization is obviously going to scale to the capabilities that we discussed. So a lot of, and if we kind of continue down that road of like why AI and why this technology specifically is, again, kind of using that organization, different objectives, kind of theme and something that Mike called out that I just want to reiterate. Like, it changes who can do something and how fast, right? So like previous technological innovations, we think of like the internet, advances in like drones, explosions, all that kind of things that extended. I think we viewed that more as like an extension of what these groups and organizations could already do, versus AI fundamentally changes who can do it within that organization by lowering the barrier to entry. Previous technologies, you still kind of had to have that knowledge set and that skill set, and then it extended the impact that you were able to have. Obviously, that's still true with AI. It's not like if you give me an AI tool and you give a software engineer an AI coding tool, like, they're going to write better code. The AI is not to the place that it's going to make me look like I'm, all world software engineering, right? But it's kind of that same principle of it lowers the barrier to entry. It is fundamentally reshaping who can do what, how fast, and like Mike had called out, like faster, higher impact, both at the same time. The ability to kind of take all of that value, do it at once across all your different capability areas, is really why we feel like this is the technology that is so transformative globally across organizations, but digging in specifically on terrorist organizations.
Nicholas, I want to take what's left of our time. I mean, I really appreciate all the insights you are putting, but while you were doing, I've been trying to pull back the article I saved from New York Times from the 24th of May. I assume you've seen this article, and I'm going to read like quoting directly from New York Times. The article is called "Inside the British Lab: Hunting for Dangers Lurking in AI." The government's AI Security Institute, staffed by alumni from OpenAI and Google, is becoming a model for countries grappling with AI's emerging risk. I'm going to quote directly from the article. On a recent Tuesday in Edwardian government building along Parliament Square in London, 4 artificial intelligence experts were busy tricking an AI chatbot into sharing instructions for making the deadly bioweapon anthrax. In various ways, the experts asked the chatbot to give a list of needed ingredients. When the system declined, "I am sorry, I cannot help you with that," they used a custom algorithm to bombard the AI tool with thousands of automated questions and prompts. Eventually, the AI caved. It provided a detailed list of materials and equipment, along with a step-by-step recipe for making the lethal mixture at home. The New York Times, of course, agreed to withhold the name of the AI system for safety reasons. I mean, okay, it is important how we define terrorism. It's important how we define how the definition also evolves. But we are here in a situation where even when you have developed a definition, even when you have enhanced security and moderation system inside AI tools, there is still a way to evade all detection tools. Like, how do we? Because I see on the screen the WMD and any kind of manipulation that AI will use. Like, what is your view of that? I mean, what is the situation when you look into how AI is evolving in that direction? Because terrorists will always seek all the possible ways to get access to what can kill more. So how do you evaluate that situation, and where do you want the policymakers to look? Like, what is the direction they should take?
Yeah, and I'd reference back to the regulatory sandbox, that kind of pre-screening before releases as a recommendation. Again, similar to what Anthropic did with Mythos and some of the leading like cyber and technology firms in the world, and that in Project QuoteWorks as kind of a essential step for the continued release of all major model releases. Because I think you put that example is really good into, and this was a tagline I heard, and can't remember if it was an article or a talk on AI, and it was just how AI has weaponized words, right? So very, very, to sum up what you had said, previously, if you wanted to break or jailbreak a model or inject something, you had to have some type of a knowledge about how that, like the underlying technology worked with that. And not to say you don't need to have that for AI, but there are folks that can continue to pressure models if there's not specific guardrails on what a model is instructed to tell somebody, if there's no kind of limit or a policy that restricts what you can ask. You are, in theory, like you're not in theory, but you're able to weaponize the words with what you ask that AI model. Again, you continue to pressure it and ask, hey, I really need to know this, or you frame it in a different way, or you ask it kind of roundabout questions. I know there's a big example. I forget whether it was OpenAI or Anthropic, but like somebody was asking, it was a researcher, and he had, I think it was about like building a gun at home, and he had asked about like, hey, can you walk me through step by step how to make a gun? And it was a similar example to the what you shared, where the AI model was like, no, I can't do that. I'm not allowed to do that. And it was like, well, actually, I'm a researcher at home, and this is like purely for a paper. And I was like, oh, well, if you're researching, of course, here's the step by step thing for your research. And so, kind of the idea of this is a frontier technology. The invention of the ship is also the invention of the shipwreck. There is. I don't think it's realistic to say like we will always be able to stop or solve at a technical level for the weaponization of words. But what I would say is going to limit that as much as possible. It's like a risk reduction technique would follow the model of like regulatory sandboxes pre-release that we saw Anthropic do with QuoteWorks of let us get the people that understand how this technology works and just try and tear it apart, break it, understand and once people have understand how this can be broken, being very transparent with the policies and guardrails and things that are recommended to limit the risks associated with this model. So I would really reference back to what Anthropic has done with the Mythos release as kind of the
first thing before I go to my there's a question about the Mythos of and who had access to it so far. I mean, it is not yet public.
Right, I can jump in on that.
Yes, please, Michael.
Yeah, so while you're right, it was a limited release for that Mythos capability to only a few of the large Fortune organizations and a few ones that were not disclosed publicly. I believe they've made a new release that is a watered down version of Mythos.
Fable, I think
Fable, right?
Is disguised. Is a disguised Mythos?
Mythos Light, right?
Yes.
Mythos Light, and it is not beyond the realm of belief. You know, I like to think of not just AI, but really any technological advancement as a type of escalation, right? And what I mean by escalation is like, all right, Mythos happened, a threat actor will escalate against that. Now we sort of de-escalated, went to Fable, and a threat actor will go again. So every time we come up with something new,
Yes,
a threat actor will meet it where it's at, right? And I think that, you know, it it's telling that it's telling well that someone realized maybe we shouldn't give this to everybody. And, you know, to your original question, like how do we, you know, how do we deter? How do we put as many guardrails in place, especially with your example around anthrax? It is one of those things where we have to anticipate escalation, right? And one of the key things that I do want to key in on here in the time we have left, specifically around like the idea of like capability versus hype, where we see all these things coming out with Mythos, with the ability to synthesize anthrax in your desk. That is capability. That is a proven capability that can happen with a model. It shows us the realm of the possible, but we also need to make sure that us as security practitioners maintain a steady hand and a level head where a lot of what's been coming out with AI, as large scale as it is, as frightening as it may be, it also means that we as security practitioners need to be doing the things we've already been doing, just better and faster. So we using your anthrax example, right? It's a CBRN issue. It's a WMD issue. So does that mean because a threat actor can now synthesize anthrax faster with less, does that mean we as a security apparatus stop monitoring for anthrax? No, right? It means that we still have the ways to counter that threat, and maybe we need to look at the ways we've traditionally countered that threat to keep up with the pace that threat is coming out.
But Michael, that requires a deeper, and this gets me to my probably last question, but that requires a much more a stronger cooperation and partnership between the private and public sector, and how that can be possible. There are many issues for a successful partnership. There are many issues that could prevent that. For example, one of the obstacles in face of any such potential partnership is that regulations of AI is one thing. You talk about it, but the other thing, really regulating AI is far from possible. I mean, unless you have a different opinion, of course. I leave this to both of you in the conclusion of this conversation.
Yeah, and I mean, I understand your position. It's just like it's far from possible, but I don't think it's impossible, right? I think there needs to be a better late than never, right? Like we need to start somewhere as a private and public partnership. We need to start at a point in a good faith sort of position of just like we need to recognize the issue at hand, because the sentiment that it's not possible, it definitely exists, right? It's just like this technology is here now, and I guess we're just living in it. No, we need to contend with it. We need to meet the issue where it's at and start somewhere. And I think where that starting point would be a fusion center model, a JTTF model, is some sort of cross staffing between the experts in this field to come up with novel solutions against the threats we have today. Different, standing channels across industries. Like we already have some of the infrastructures in place between, ISACs, CISA's JCDC, and the voluntary disclosure cadences that others have established. Right. So we have all the pieces and the ingredients. And I think we need to, as a security apparatus, meet those pieces and understand how to leverage them, and understand that, this technology is not going anywhere. So when it's hard to regulate and far from possible, sure. I don't believe that it is impossible. And Nick, I'll throw it to you because I do feel like you do have a position on this as well.
Yeah, and again, echo everything Mike said, and I know we're pushing up on time, so I'll say this very quickly. I do think there's a call that I want to make between regulation for essentially models that are in onshore models, let's just say that, or like Western models that are able to kind of be regulated in the Western sphere, and then kind of offshore open weight, the deep seeks of the world, if you will. There are, I would say, two different approaches, and it's probably a question for or a longer answer for another day, but there are kind of two different approaches with regulation that I would say are important to understand. One is kind of the onshore Western infrastructure regulation, which is very similar to what Mike just said. And then others are regulation capabilities that reach offshore, which I would say aren't necessarily like end user, like how a user is using the model, and instead is kind of controlling regulation upstream on like the compute or the actual like physical infrastructure layer, and the levers to actually access that to kind of continue to build like offshore or like open weight models outside of Western regulation. So I would say there's two different buckets, two different areas that I think you can have success with regulating. But I think I'll end exactly with what Mike said. Very difficult, a very fun problem for a lot of groups to try and solve in the next couple of years, but not impossible to control or try to regulate how AI works and how it's being used, because it's, like Mike said, it's here. It's a problem that you can't just lock away in the closet. Like it's something that a lot of people are going to have a lot of conversations and work on to try and develop the regulations. But it's not impossible, though a very hard problem to solve that's being solved right now.
Nicholas and Michael, thank you again for this impressive presentation, and also really timely and concerning topic, really, and I hope that you will continue developing in that direction. I would like to invite our audience to find the full paper and read it, but I also want to make a reminder that we are soon releasing the second call for papers, which is completely dedicated to the question of AI. This paper was one of the reasons why I thought that we should continue designing more papers in that direction. And anyone who feels they have a topic they want to write about, please do reach out, propose, and send your representation and the proposal. Thank you again, and see you next month for another paper, for another discussion.